to freedom. As the sign says, I am finally free. Thank you all for celebrating with me tonight.
My father raised a glass to celebrate the day he threw me out of the house. The whole yard laughed, and I stood there under the yellow lights like a stain someone had finally dragged into public view. The party was held right in the backyard of the house where I grew up, the same yard that once held the white swing my mother used to repaint every summer. That night, the swing was gone, ripped away to make room for cocktail tables, string lights, and a glittering sign that read, "Congratulations to Richard Bennett on finally being free." People laughed every time they looked at it. The neighbors raised their glasses. My father's business friends clapped him on the back as if he had just won a long, hard war. And I was the trophy dragged out for everyone to enjoy. My father stood in the center of the yard in a charcoal suit stretched tight over the stomach of a man more comfortable giving orders than apologies. He lifted his wineglass, his voice loud and full of satisfaction. "Everyone here knows my daughter Ava. 30 years old, still living at home, no real job, no husband, no responsibility. But tonight, I'm happy to announce that she is finally moving out. My family can finally have some peace." Applause broke out. I heard soft laughter from the corner of the yard. Some people did not even bother to hide their pity. Others looked at me the way people look at a warning sign, a living example of failure. My younger sister Chloe took a sip of champagne and tilted her head, smiling with that sweet, artificial softness she wore so well. "Don't make this awkward, Ava." Honestly, everyone knew this day was coming. My Uncle Gary jumped in, already slurring from too much liquor. "If she were my kid, I would have kicked her out at 25. Richard's been too patient." Every sentence hit like a stone thrown at my chest. Not enough to kill. Just enough to bruise in places no one could see. I stood very still. I did not cry. I did not blush. I did not tell them that for the last 4 years, I had been the one paying the property insurance whenever my father forgot. I did not tell them that I was the one patching the holes in his company's books when cash flow leaked out like blood from a wound no one cared to close. I did not tell them that I was the one staying up until 3 in the morning fixing contracts, calling lawyers, securing short-term loans, making payroll on time so that he could spend the next morning on the golf course and still play the role of a self-made businessman. No one at that party knew any of that. Or maybe they had never wanted to know. My father stepped closer and lowered his voice, though it was still loud enough for the people nearest to hear. "Stop looking like a victim. You've freeloaded long enough. That room upstairs, the electricity, the food, all of it came from me. From now on, take care of your own life." I looked at him for a long moment. Under the lights, I could see every line at the corners of his eyes, the thin burst veins across the bridge of his nose, and the cold pride of a man who believed he had just reclaimed his power. He did not know that real power had never belonged to the loudest voice in the yard. It lived in passwords, files, wire transfers, and relationships other people assumed would always be there. It lived in the hands he called useless. My mother stood on the back porch, silently turning her wedding ring around her finger. She did not defend me. She did not even look me in the eye. That silence was more humiliating than the laughter. It told me that in this house, I was not only betrayed. I had been quietly offered up to keep everyone else comfortable. I bent down and picked up the handbag I had packed earlier. I had known this night was coming. I just had not expected my father to turn it into a ceremony. Chloe laughed. "Oh my God, she actually packed. I guess even she knew it was time to feel ashamed." I pulled my suitcase out from the shadows beside the kitchen door. The wheels scraped over the stone patio with a dry, cutting sound, sharp as a blade dragged across polished glass. Conversations around me slowed. Some people stared. Some looked away. My father smirked, thinking he had already won. I walked toward the gate without turning back. The night was cold. The air bit at my skin like 100 tiny needles. But for the first time in years, my chest felt open, raw with pain, but open. Behind me, the music kept playing. The laughter kept rising. They did not know that what had just walked out of that house was not a burden. It was the final support beam. 2 weeks from now, when my father's phone starts ringing before sunrise, when the company accounts begin to choke, when the unpaid bills no one bothered to look at rise to the surface like bodies floating up from dark water, he will understand what he threw out of his life. But that night, I only kept walking, dragging my suitcase into the dark with frozen hands and a secret burning hot inside my chest. I had never been the useless daughter they described to the world. I was the reason they had managed to stay standing at all. I did not go far that first night. I drove to the 24-hour diner off Route 9, the one with cracked red booths and a flickering neon sign that made everyone inside look tired and haunted. The kind of place where truckers drank burnt coffee at midnight and nobody asked questions if a woman sat alone with swollen eyes and 2 overstuffed suitcases in the back of her car. I took the corner booth by the window and wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee I did not want. My fingers were trembling, though I kept my face calm. Outside, the parking lot shone under a weak halo of light, silvered by mist. Every few seconds, headlights dragged across the glass, then disappeared. That was the first moment I let myself breathe. Not cry. Not yet. Just breathe. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyeliner and a voice worn soft by long shifts, slid a laminated menu in front of me and looked at the suitcases through the window before looking back at my face. Long night? I almost laughed. You could say that. She gave a small nod, the kind women give each other when they recognize a wound but do not force it open. Coffee's on the house tonight, honey. Then she walked away, and I sat there staring at the steam curling from the cup, thinking about how strange it was that kindness from a stranger could feel more like home than anything I had felt in years. My phone started buzzing before I even took my first sip. Chloe. I let it ring. Then my Uncle Gary. Then my mother. Then my father. I watched his name flash across the screen until it stopped, leaving the silence behind like smoke. A minute later, a text appeared. Don't cause drama. Just take your things and go quietly. I stared at the message so long the screen dimmed. Go quietly. As if I had ever done anything else. For years, I had gone quietly fixed payroll errors before employees noticed, quietly moved money between accounts so checks would not bounce, quietly called vendors and soothed over missed payments with a calm voice and promises I had no right to make, quietly rewrote proposals, corrected invoices, covered legal fees, tracked deadlines, and stopped disaster after disaster while my father took credit in tailored suits and polished speeches. Quietly swallowed every insult because I told myself family was complicated, because I told myself my mother was tired, because I told myself Chloe was young and cruel in the careless way beautiful people often are when life has never denied them anything, because I told myself one day, someone would see me clearly. I had built my life around being unseen. The realization hit with a force so sudden it made me sit back against the booth. No one was ever going to tell the truth for me. If I wanted my life back, I would have to drag the truth into the light myself. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed pale blue against the diner's dim walls. My desktop was almost insultingly neat, every folder labeled, every file nested and dated. Years of cleaning up chaos had made me ruthless about order. I clicked open the first folder, Bennett Consulting Financials. Then vendor agreements. Then emergency transfers. Then insurance. Then payroll corrections. Thousands of files. My files. Not because my father had formally given me a title. He never would have done that. But because every time something started collapsing, he handed it to me with a scowl and a muttered figure it out. No paycheck. No credit. No acknowledgement. Just expectation, layered year after year until I had become the invisible machinery under his empire. I began making copies. Every wire transfer I had personally covered, every late notice I had intercepted, every contract I had corrected, every timestamp showing documents created on my laptop, from my accounts, under My login every email where my father barked orders and my uncle made excuses and Chloe forwarded complaints about office aesthetics while I was trying to stop real financial bleeding. The deeper I went, the uglier it became. There were mortgage payments I had covered for the house during 2 separate quarters when the company cash reserves dried up. There were insurance premiums paid from my personal savings. There were legal retainers I had fronted and never been reimbursed for. There were spreadsheets mapping debt so carefully they looked less like accounting and more like battlefield medicine. I was not living in that house for free. I had been subsidizing it. The waitress returned with a plate of fries I had not ordered. "You need something in your stomach," she said simply. I looked up at her, startled, then thanked her. When she left, I glanced back at the screen and felt something inside me shift. Not break. Harden. For the first time, the story I had been fed my whole life began to rot in front of me. Freeloader, failure, burden, no. I was the emergency fund, I was the unpaid operations manager, I was the firewall between my father's ego and his collapse. And now I was gone. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "Please call me. He's very upset." I actually smiled at that. A small, cold smile that did not feel like me until it did. Very upset. He had thrown me out under string lights and applause. He could sit with his feelings a little longer. I reached for a fry, salty and hot, and opened a fresh document. At the top of the blank page, I typed 3 words. What I paid. Then I kept going, line by line, building the record that would one day bring the whole lie down. By the 10th day, the first cracks were already showing. I saw them before anyone called me. Not because I was still watching the family group chat, I had muted that mess the moment I left, but because habits like mine do not die cleanly. They linger. They twitch. Even after being cut loose, part of me still woke before sunrise expecting to put out someone else's fire. That morning, I sat at the small kitchen table in the studio apartment I had rented with money from an account my father never knew existed. The place was plain. Almost painfully so. White walls. One narrow window. A humming refrigerator that sounded like it was always trying not to fail. But it was mine. No footsteps above me. No voices through the walls. No one demanding, criticizing, accusing. Just silence. And in that silence, my phone began to vibrate. First came an email from one of Bennett Consulting's vendors. The subject line was polite, but the wording underneath carried the sharp edge of someone who had been ignored too long. Following up on outstanding invoice status. Then another. Then one from payroll software support. Then a message from a junior office manager I barely knew. "Hi Ava, sorry to bother you. Richard said you no longer work with the company, but we can't access the revised payment schedule you built. Do you know where those files are stored?" I stared at the message until my coffee went cold. For a second, the old reflex surged through me so hard my fingers actually moved toward the keyboard. I could have solved it in 3 minutes. I knew exactly which folder it was in. Exactly which password variation my father would fail to guess. Exactly which payment had to go first to stop the vendor freeze. My body still remembered rescue even when my mind was learning refusal. I set the phone face down. No. If a building had to collapse before people admitted I had been holding it up, then maybe collapse was the only language they would understand. By noon, the calls started. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. By the 3rd, I finally listened. It was my Uncle Gary, and for once there was no liquor-soft arrogance in his voice. Only panic wrapped in forced irritation. "Ava, call me back. Your father is locked out of some banking portal, and payroll's delayed because nobody can find the approval chain. You know how staff get when checks are late. Just call back and tell us where everything is. No need to be childish about this." Childish. I played the message twice, not because I doubted what I had heard, but because I wanted to feel the full shape of it. They were drowning, and still they had to insult me while asking for air. By the end of the 2nd week, The unraveling had become visible enough that even the people who once smirked in my father's backyard had started whispering. I heard it from Marisol first. Marisol had worked in the office for 6 years. She had seen more than she ever said, and she had always spoken to me with a careful respect that told me she knew exactly who handled the real work. She called from an unknown number just after 6 in the evening. I almost did not answer. "Ava," she said quietly, "I'm calling from my personal phone." I leaned back on my couch and looked at the fading gold light on my wall. "That usually means bad news." She exhaled. "Your father missed 2 vendor deadlines, 1 insurance renewal, and payroll had to be partially delayed this morning. Gary tried blaming accounting, but there is no accounting system, Ava. There was just you." The words landed with a strange stillness inside me. There was just you. I closed my eyes. In the background, I could hear office noise. A printer. A drawer slamming. Someone speaking too loudly in a voice stretched thin by stress. Marisol continued. "Chloe came in and spent an hour screaming because the florist for some client event wasn't confirmed. Richard's in his office yelling about sabotage. He keeps saying you must have hidden things on purpose." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not a happy laugh. Something sharper. More exhausted. "Hidden things?" I labeled everything. "I know," she said. "That's the point. You made it look easy, so they thought it was simple." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. You made it look easy, so they thought it was simple. Maybe that was the curse of competent women everywhere. We stitched the wound so neatly people forgot there had ever been blood. That night, I opened the file I had been building since the diner and added a new section. What happened after I left? Missed vendor deadlines, payroll delay, insurance lapse, access failures, client event mismanagement, unauthorized account lockouts caused by repeated failed login attempts. I documented each item with dates, names, screenshots, voicemail transcripts. I was no longer collecting proof for revenge alone. I was building a wall of reality, brick by brick, strong enough to withstand whatever story my father would invent next. The next morning, my mother came to my apartment unannounced. I saw her sedan from the window before she knocked. For one long second, I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen. Dish towel in hand, my pulse thudding at my throat. She looked smaller outside my building than she had ever looked inside that house. The perfect hair, the pressed blouse, the pearls she wore like armor, all of it suddenly seemed thin. When I opened the door, she offered me a trembling smile that did not reach her eyes. "Can I come in?" I should have said no. Instead, I stepped aside. She entered slowly, glancing around the apartment with the disoriented expression of someone who had never imagined me anywhere beyond the room they assigned me. Her gaze lingered on the second-hand sofa, the stack of legal pads on my table, the laptop, the neat rows of folders. "You found a place quickly," she said. I looked at her. "I've been finding places for myself for years. You just never noticed." The words hit harder than I intended. She flinched. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A motorbike passed outside. Somewhere in the hall, a child laughed. Then she clasped her hands together and said the thing she had clearly rehearsed on the drive over. "Your father is under a lot of pressure." I felt something inside me go cold. Not "I'm sorry," not "what he did was cruel," not "I should have stopped it." Just pressure. I nodded slowly. He seemed relaxed when he was drinking champagne over my eviction. Her face tightened. "You know how your father gets when he feels cornered." I stared at her, stunned by the cowardice of that sentence. Cornered. As if his cruelty were weather. As if humiliation were something that simply rolled in and had to be tolerated until skies cleared. "And what about me?" I asked softly. "What do I get to be when I'm cornered?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother sit in the full weight of her own failure. Not because she had yelled the loudest, but because she had done what frightened people do best. Nothing. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Your father wrote down some of the passwords he thinks might work. He wanted me to ask if. I did not let her finish. No. She blinked. Ava, no, I said again, sharper this time. Tell him the same thing he told me. He can take care of his own life. Her eyes filled, but I no longer rushed to comfort tears that had never once protected mine. When she left, she moved like a woman walking out of a church after hearing a truth she did not want. I locked the door behind her and stood there with my forehead resting against the wood. I was shaking. Not because I regretted it. Because I didn't. That was the part that changed everything. By the 14th day, my father finally called himself. No assistants. No uncle. No mother as messenger. Just him. I let it ring 4 times before answering. His voice came through rough and furious, but beneath it I heard something new. Something ragged. Ava, what exactly do you think you're doing? I looked at the folders spread across my table. Every payment. Every correction. Every lie. Every hour of invisible labor turned into hard evidence. Then I answered in a voice so calm it startled even me. For the first time in my life, Dad, nothing. And on the other end of the line, I heard him break into silence. He asked to meet me 3 days later. Not at the office. Not at the house. Not anywhere that belonged to him. A diner. The same one off Route 9 where I had sat alone on the night he threw me out, clutching a cup of bad coffee while my whole life cracked open in silence. When his text came through with the location and time, I almost laughed at the irony. Maybe he chose it because it felt neutral. Maybe because he thought a public place would give him control. Men like my father always preferred witnesses when they wanted to perform decency. I arrived 10 minutes early. The neon sign buzzed in the gray afternoon, half the letters flickering like they were too tired to finish the word. Inside, the air smelled like coffee, syrup, and the stale heat of old arguments. I slid into the same corner booth by the window, only this time I was not trembling. I had a leather folder in my bag, a phone full of screenshots, and a calm so cold it felt almost holy. When my father walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked smaller. Not physically. He was still broad-shouldered, still wearing a pressed coat, still carrying himself with that stiff-backed insistence that the room owed him space. But the polish was cracking. There were dark half-moons under his eyes. His jaw was unshaven. The skin around his mouth had tightened into the hard, dry look of someone who had been clenching his teeth for days. Behind him came my mother, pale and composed in the way people get when they are trying not to come apart in public. My Uncle Gary followed next, red-faced and restless. Chloe came last, sunglasses in her hair even though the sky outside was overcast, her lips pressed into a line like she had been dragged there against her will. They all slid into the booth across from me as if this were a family lunch. No one hugged me. No one said they were sorry. The waitress came over, glanced at all of us, then gave me the briefest look of recognition. She did not smile. But she set a coffee in front of me without asking and said, "Honey, you already know what you want." I met her eyes, yes. My father cleared his throat the second she walked away. Let's not make a spectacle of this. I leaned back against the cracked vinyl seat and looked at him for a long moment. You threw a party when you kicked me out. My uncle shifted uncomfortably. Chloe looked away. My mother stared down at the sugar packets lined up beside the napkin dispenser as if they might save her from having to hear the truth spoken aloud. My father exhaled sharply through his nose. We are not here to relive that night. We are here because the company is in a difficult position, and there are certain things only you know how to access. There it was. Not we miss you, not we were wrong, not what he did was cruel. Just access. I folded my hands on the table. Then it sounds like the company has a leadership problem. His face darkened instantly. Don't do that. Do what? Act clever. Act superior. You know exactly what I mean. We all understand you helped with some administrative tasks, Ava, But enough of this fantasy that you were running everything. The situation is temporary. We just need the passwords, the vendor schedule, the payroll map, and the revised legal contacts. Administrative tasks. For one dangerous second, I felt the old pain flash through me so hard it was almost physical. Years of nights without sleep. Years of stitching together emergencies while they mocked me upstairs over dinner. Years of being treated like a spare part in the machine I was secretly operating. Then the pain passed. What remained was ice. I opened my bag and set the leather folder on the table between us. No one touched it. My father's eyes dropped to it, then rose back to my face with suspicion. What is that? I unfastened it slowly. Inside were printed spreadsheets, payment confirmations, transfer receipts, insurance notices, contract revisions, timestamp logs, payroll corrections, legal invoices, and email chains. Every page was tabbed. Every tab was labeled. Clean. Methodical. Impossible to wave away. That, I said, is what you called some administrative tasks. I slid the first page toward him. A summary sheet, mortgage payments on the house covered from my personal account during the quarter, your cash reserves failed, insurance renewals paid by me when you forgot and the policy nearly lapsed, legal retainers advanced by me and never reimbursed, vendor emergencies handled off record, payroll corrections made at 2 and 3 in the morning so your staff got paid on time and your reputation stayed clean. My father's expression changed by degrees. First irritation. Then disbelief. Then the smallest, ugliest flicker of fear. Uncle Gary reached for a page and frowned as his eyes moved across the columns. What is this? Proof, I said. Chloe let out a short, brittle laugh. This is ridiculous. You're making spreadsheets and acting like you built the company. I turned to her. No. I'm making spreadsheets because that is the only language any of you believe when it doesn't come from me. That shut her up. My mother's hands had gone very still in her lap. Her wedding ring glinted when she tightened her fingers around one another. My father flipped through more pages now, faster, his breathing growing heavier. Where did you get all this? I almost smiled. From the years you forgot I was there. He found one of the wire transfer receipts and stared at it for several seconds too long. I watched the exact moment recognition hit him. I remembered that transfer. It had been made just before Christmas 2 years earlier, when one major client paid late and payroll was going to miss by 48 hours. He had screamed in his office for an hour, blamed everyone in sight, then stormed out for a dinner meeting. I had quietly moved money from my own savings so the checks would clear by morning. He looked up at me, and this time the anger in his face was forced. Weak. Trying to cover something far less flattering. You chose to do those things, he said. The sentence hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning too long. I repeated it softly. I chose to do those things. He leaned forward, mistaking repetition for surrender. Exactly. No one forced you. Families help each other. You lived under my roof. You benefited from the family name. Now you're trying to turn ordinary support into some kind of accusation. I laughed then. Not politely. Not quietly. It startled all of them. Families help each other? I said. Is that what you call organizing a party to celebrate humiliating your daughter in front of the neighborhood? Is that what you call letting me keep your business alive while telling everyone I was a useless freeloader? Is that what you call sending mom to my apartment with a piece of paper full of guest passwords instead of a real apology? My mother flinched as if slapped. My father's nostrils flared. Keep your voice down, he snapped. No, I said. The word came out so clean and hard that even I felt it echo through me. No, I will not keep my voice down so you can stay comfortable. I spent years staying quiet while you used me, dismissed me, and then publicly degraded me for the exact work that kept you afloat. You don't get silence from me anymore. Several heads turned from nearby booths. I did not care. Uncle Gary muttered, Jesus Christ, Ava, no, Uncle Gary. You don't get to do that either. You mocked me at the party. You told everyone I should have been kicked out years ago. Meanwhile, I was covering business fires you were too drunk or too careless to handle. His face blanched red, then gray. Chloe crossed her arms. So what now? You want us to grovel? Is that it? You want some dramatic apology because you've decided to have a victim complex? I looked at her for a long time. At the perfect makeup. The expensive coat. The hard little sneer trembling at the edge of her mouth. Then I slid one last page across the table. Her corporate card statement. Florist consultations, event design deposits, luxury client gifting upgrades, rush decor fees, personal styling charge to business entertainment. Chloe stared at the page as if it had bitten her. Where did you get that? I held her gazed. I signed off on enough of your messes to know exactly how expensive your ignorance is. For the first time in her life, I saw my sister lose color. My father slammed his palm on the table. That's enough. The silverware rattled. The waitress glanced over from the counter. A trucker in the next booth lifted his eyes from his plate. No, I said again, quieter now, which was somehow worse. This is enough. This is the part where you all finally understand that I was never the burden in this family. I was the subsidy. I was the backup plan. I was the labor you didn't have to pay because you convinced yourselves I owed you for breathing under your roof. My father stared at me with naked hatred now, but behind it, I could see the collapse. Not financial. Personal. The kind men like him fear most. The collapse of the story they tell about themselves. He had spent years casting himself as the provider, the strong one. The self-made one, the father dragging an ungrateful daughter through life. And now, in a roadside diner with sticky menus and weak coffee, his whole mythology was bleeding out across laminated wood in neat black text. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard, is any of this untrue? He did not answer right away. That silence told me more than anything else could have. Chloe looked from him to me and back again. Uncle Gary rubbed a hand over his mouth. Something ugly and stunned began spreading across all their faces at once, the realization that the person they had laughed at was the person who had been carrying them. My father tried once more, but even he could hear the weakness in his own voice. You're being vindictive. I shook my head. No. Vindictive would have been deleting everything, torching every vendor relationship, and letting the company die overnight. I didn't do that. I walked away. You failed all by yourselves. No one spoke. Outside, a truck roared past the window, spraying gray rainwater from the road. Inside, the coffee machine hissed. Somewhere near the register, dishes clinked softly. The whole world kept moving while my family sat in the wreckage of a truth they could no longer outrun. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was thinner. I set it in front of my father but kept my fingers on it. What's that? He asked. My terms. His eyes narrowed. Terms? Yes. Because if you want anything from me now, this is no longer family. It's business. I slid the folder toward him. Consulting rate, retainer paid up front, full written acknowledgement of prior unpaid labor and reimbursements owed. No access without signed agreements. No direct contact outside legal or professional channels. And one final condition, sitting alone at the bottom of the page like the blade under velvet. A written public statement correcting the lie that I was ever a freeloader. Chloe actually gasped. Uncle Gary cursed under his breath. My mother closed her eyes. My father did not touch the folder. He just stared at me as if I had become a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Maybe I had. Maybe the woman they raised to absorb humiliation quietly had finally died the night I rolled my suitcase across that patio. Good, I thought. Let her stay dead. I stood, left cash for my coffee on the table, and picked up my bag. You have 24 hours, I said. After that, my rates go up. Then I looked at each of them one by one. At my mother, who had mistaken silence for survival. At my uncle, who had mistaken mockery for authority. At my sister, who had mistaken polish for worth, and finally at my father, who had mistaken dependency for power. "You wanted me gone," I said softly. "Now you get to find out what that really costs." And I walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving them in the booth with the evidence, the terms, and the first real bill they had ever received from me. They did not answer within 24 hours. My father waited 30. That was how men like him negotiated. Not with reason. With delay. With silence sharpened into punishment, as if making me wait would somehow drag me back into the old shape of myself. The obedient one. The useful one. The daughter who mistook being needed for being loved. But by the time his email finally arrived, I was no longer standing in that old doorway. I was at my small kitchen table, barefoot, sunlight warming the cheap wood, a cup of tea cooling beside my laptop. The apartment still looked spare, still half unfurnished, but now it felt lived in. A throw folded over the arm of the couch. Fresh groceries in the fridge. A basil plant by the window. Little things. Quiet things. Proof that a life did not have to be grand to be real. His message was 3 sentences long. "We are willing to discuss temporary consulting support. The public statement is unnecessary and excessive. Please advise next steps." I read it twice and smiled without humor. Of course. He would admit dependence before he admitted the lie. I closed the email and opened the folder where I had saved every document, every receipt, every voice message, every line item that told the truth they had spent years trying to bury. Then I forwarded a copy of my terms to an attorney Marisol had recommended 3 days earlier, a woman named Dana Mercer whose handshake had been firm and whose eyes had sharpened the moment I started laying out the facts. When I met Dana, she did not interrupt once. She let me speak. Let me put years of invisible labor into words. Let me slide spreadsheets across a polished conference table without once giving me that soft, pitying look people gave women when they were deciding whether pain counted as evidence. When I finished, she had leaned back in her chair and said, very calmly, "You have more leverage than you think." I had carried that sentence home like a lit match. Now I used it. I wrote one reply. No public correction, no access.no reimbursement acknowledgement, no discussion. Further communication goes through counsel. Then I pressed send. The response came faster than I expected. Not from him. From Chloe. "How dare you do this to this family?" I stared at the words on the screen, and for a moment I was back in the old house, hearing her heels click down the hallway, smelling her expensive perfume, feeling myself brace for the sweet, smiling cruelty she wielded so casually. Chloe had always been gifted at making harm sound elegant. She could insult you in a voice soft enough to pass for concern. She could step over your body and still look polished doing it. I typed back only once. "You mean the family that held a party when I was thrown out?" She did not respond. That afternoon, the first real crack went public. It started small, the way collapses often do. A client withdrew from a major contract renewal. Then another delayed signing. A vendor placed Bennett Consulting on restricted terms pending payment. Someone in the office leaked that payroll had been late twice in 1 month. By evening, the whispers were no longer whispers. They were calls. Questions. Concern dressed as professionalism. Marisol called me just before sunset. "You should know," she said carefully, "your father is saying you sabotaged internal systems before you left." I stood by the window, looking down at the traffic dragging its lights across wet pavement. Is he saying that because he believes it, or because it's all he has left? A pause, probably both. I closed my eyes. It hurt less than it would have once. That was the strangest part. Not because betrayal had become acceptable, but because it had finally become unsurprising. When people built their comfort on your silence, they called your truth aggression the moment you spoke. Did anyone believe him? I asked. Another pause, shorter this time, not the people who matter. After we hung up, I stood there for a long while, one hand curled around the cool edge of the windowsill. Outside, the city kept moving with its usual indifference. A siren wailed in the distance. Somewhere below, someone laughed too loudly. Life went on, broad and careless, even while whole private worlds split open. 3 days later, Dana called. "Your father's attorney wants to settle." I almost laughed. "Settle what exactly?" "Everything," she said. "Back reimbursements. Formal consulting terms if you're still willing." "And the statement?" I went still. "The statement?" "Yes. They want to negotiate wording." For a moment, I said nothing. Sunlight stretched pale across the floorboards. The basil leaves trembled slightly in the draft from the window. Somewhere inside me, an old locked door opened with a sound so soft I almost missed it. Not triumph. Not revenge. Recognition. They were finally being forced to say out loud what they had spent years denying. The negotiations took a week. My father fought every line. Dana later told me she had rarely seen a man cling so hard to a false image while standing on such obvious evidence. He wanted reimbursement without admission. Access without accountability. My labor without my name. He wanted the benefits of truth while still living inside the lie. This time, he did not get that luxury. The final agreement included every dollar I had fronted for the house, the company, the legal retainers, the insurance, the emergency payroll coverage. It included interest. It included a consulting structure so strict he would never again be able to summon me with a barked order and call it family obligation. And it included the statement. He refused at first to post it personally. Dana refused to move without it. The board member of a partner firm got involved. Then a client. Then someone with more money and less patience than my father finally made it clear that reputational dishonesty was bad for business. In the end, he signed. The statement was shorter than it should have been. Cleaner than I would have written. But it was real. It acknowledged that I had provided years of unpaid operational and financial support to both the household and Bennett Consulting. IT corrected prior mischaracterizations about my role and contributions. IT stated that public remarks made about me had been unfair. Unfair. A small word for a lifetime of humiliation. Still, I took it. Because some victories do not arrive as thunder, they arrive as ink. The money hit my account on a Thursday morning. I did not cry when I saw the balance. I just sat very still, feeling the air move in and out of my lungs, and understood that for the first time in my adult life, what I had given the world had come back with my name attached. That evening, I went to the diner off Route 9. The waitress recognized me immediately. "Well, look at you," she said, setting down a mug before I asked. "You look different." I smiled. "I am different." She nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Good." I ordered pie this time. Cherry. While I waited, I opened my phone and saw that my mother had sent a message an hour earlier. "I should have protected you. I know that now. I am sorry." I read it 3 times. There had been a version of me, not long ago, who would have burst into tears at those words. Who would have treated them like water in the desert? Who would have rushed to turn apology into absolution because wanting a mother's love can make a person merciful long before they are healed? But healing had changed the geometry of me. I wrote back carefully. "I believe that you are sorry. That does not undo what you allowed. I need distance." She answered only once. "I understand." And maybe she did. Maybe losing my silence had finally taught them all the size of what they had consumed. A month later, Bennett Consulting downsized. Not dramatically. Not in flames. The kind of decline that looks respectable from a distance and rotten up close. My father remained in charge, but diminished. Watched. Constrained. Forced at last to operate in a world where his instincts were no longer enough to carry him. Chloe stopped coming into the office as often. Uncle Gary disappeared from most formal decisions. Marisol got promoted. That last part pleased me more than I expected. As for me, I took only 2 consulting projects from the firm, both through Dana, both paid in advance, both completed without a single personal conversation. My father tried once to add a note at the bottom of a document request. Proud of the way you handled this. I stared at the sentence for a long time before deleting it and replying only with the invoice. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt, only crossed one last time on the way out. Spring came slowly that year. The basil on my window grew wild and bright. I bought a bookshelf. Then a better desk. Then a deep blue rug that made the whole apartment feel anchored. I slept through the night more often. I laughed more easily. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I learned that peace is not always a grand reward. Sometimes it is simply the absence of being hunted inside your own home. One Sunday morning, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror with wet hair and no makeup, sunlight on my shoulders, and the old voice rose up without warning. Freeloader, failure, burden. I looked at my reflection. Then I answered out loud, to the woman I had once abandoned just to survive. No. I was the one who kept the lights on. I was the one who held the walls together. I was the one they mistook for weak because I made strength look quiet. The silence after that felt sacred. Not empty. Earned. People like my father always think power belongs to the person holding the microphone, the title, the deed, the invitation list. They do not understand the deeper truth until it is too late. Real power often lives in the hands doing the unseen work. I am the daughter balancing the books at 2 a.m. I am the woman everyone underestimates because she is too tired to defend herself. I am the person who walks away and lets the world discover what she was worth by the shape of the collapse she leaves behind. My father threw a party to celebrate losing me. In the end, I was the cost he could not afford. And I was never a burden. I was the bill coming due.